Good morning, everybody. It's Jeff Goldberg for the Sales Pro Network. It is Friday, July 15th, halfway through July already. Can you believe that? I am the founder of the Sales Pro Network. I am a sales coach and trainer, and I work with both individuals and organizations to help them get measurable and sustainable sales increases. And I founded the Sales Pro Network as a place for salespeople to network, to learn, to ask questions, to get coaching. I intend to make it the number one spot on the internet for salespeople of all types. And if you've been with us for a while, you know that every Friday at 10 a.m. Eastern, I either do a training or a live interview with somebody who can add value to, wow, if I could speak, I'd be a professional speaker. Someone who can add value to the profession of sales. And today, once again, my friends, is no exception. It's my pleasure to introduce you to Jeff Goldstein. Good morning, Jeff.
Good morning. How are you doing, Jeff?
I'm absolutely outstanding and hope you are too. And I'd like to jump right into it. Jeff, before we get going, because I got a bunch of questions for you, because
Sure.
you are the author, you're the owner of salesleaders.only.com, and you've written some great books. Can you tell us just a little bit about your background, what brought you up to this point?
Sure. I'm an engineer by training, but I've spent my entire career grinding out a sales number, every week, month, every quarter. I led the Canadian subsidiaries of several large US-based tech companies. So I spent my career in tech. I started as a district sales manager and then really spent the last 25 years as VP sales, general manager for some kind of household names that people would recognize in the tech space. And then I decided to kind of retire from the weekly forecasting business we call technology sales leadership. But I was too young to do nothing. And so I started salesleadersonly.com for first, second line, third line sales leaders and senior sales reps in technology looking to run complex sales campaigns. That's what I do.
Got it. By the way, I forgot to mention, if you're watching us live, please say hello in the comments. If you're watching us live on Facebook and have not connected your account to StreamYard, then we won't know who you are just as Facebook users. So please put your name in there too. And of course, during the interview, if you have any questions for Jeff, put them in the comments and I'll make sure he sees those. And if you're watching us on replay, please put replay in the comments too. So Jeff, what criteria did you use when you were thinking about your next gig?
Well, I had spent really 40 years in tech. I started out of university with Hewlett-Packard, spent 10 years there. And so when I finally retired, and I kind of tell the story that I had one failed success at retirement. And, when I was cleaning out my sock drawer in February, in Toronto, my wife said, you really should go off and do something. So I really thought hard about, how do I really contribute, give back to the community? And so there were really three criteria that I thought about. The first one was no forecast calls. I've done about 3,000 forecast calls in my career. I figure that's enough for any sales leader. So no forecast calls, no employees. I've been responsible for sales teams and subsidiaries my whole career. And so I thought being a solopreneur these days, especially with tech, was probably not a bad thing. And then finally, no travel to places I don't want to go, right? I think as sales leaders, we all get on a plane. For those who don't really know much about Canada, it's the second largest geography in the world after Russia, with 1/10 the population of the US. So we have a lot of dirt to cover. And so you get on planes and spend a good part of your time doing that. Sometimes the airports aren't quite as glamorous. We were talking about LaGuardia, up until the renovation. So those were my criteria: no forecast calls, no employees, no travel to places I don't want to go. And so I thought, what could I do to leverage the experience I have and help other young sales leaders and senior sales reps ramp to productivity more quickly than they could on their own? And that's really how Sales Leaders Only was born. I have a bit of a methodology. That's what I wrote the book about. And I'm busy, teaching sales teams how to run complex sales campaigns. That was my criteria.
Got it. Good morning, Heidi Felix. Good to see you with us today. It's funny. I've been to several places in Canada doing my job. Toronto, Montreal, Ottawa, places like that. Ottawa in January, which is no fun, by the way. I still remember I got a call from Siemens Corporation saying, "I know you're working with a couple of our other divisions. Would we be able to come up to Ottawa in January?" I was like, "Oh yeah, that would be great."
That's generally.
Go ahead.
It's generally an IQ test when they ask you that, right?
I guess it was, but the cool thing was she said, look, if you do a good job in Ottawa in January, we'd like you to come to Hawaii with us and do a customer appreciation event in March. So I did a really good job, even though I was freezing in January. My favorite airport, though, in Canada was Regina. It's the size of a postage stamp.
Yeah.
I flew over what looked like a cornfield, and there's this little airport. I've never seen an airport that small. It was crazy. You just brought up the subject forecast calls you didn't want to do anymore. And forecasting as a sales manager, it's something that's crucial, and it's something that reps typically hate, and they're horrible at it. Any advice for sales reps themselves on how they can give a more accurate forecast, or how a sales leader can get a more accurate forecast?
Yeah, I think we often confuse forecasting with sales pipeline. You know, I tell people this. I have a belief that if you need 3 deals this month or this quarter to hit your forecast, and you only got 3 deals in your pipeline, you're probably going to miss, because one of those deals, for some reason beyond your control, is going to slip out and you're going to miss. So the answer for that is, rather than working on poorly qualified deals, take that time and go build more sales pipeline. I often say if you have 10 deals in your funnel, the best 3 are going to percolate to the top, and those are the ones that you're going to win. So we often confuse, I find the reps who are worst at forecasting are often the reps who have the least amount of sales pipeline. And, hope is not a strategy, and trying to get, to do things unnaturally. I think customers these days have gotten way too smart to fall for end of quarter or end of month discounting schedules. Most customers go, the price you offered me on Friday is the price I want on Monday, even if it crosses your quarter end. So that's the biggest thing, I think, is do a better job of managing your sales campaigns and have enough sales pipeline, so you're not trying to prematurely get deals to close that just aren't ready to come out of the oven.
I believe that's one of the most crucial things for salespeople. And I'm sure that, like me, you get asked lots of questions from your clients, who I'm assuming are the same as mine. A company president, a CEO, or a VP of sales, and they ask guys like us, because we're outside consultants. We don't have any skin in the game to lead them one way or the other, so they're going to get the truth. And I find, well, I'll often exaggerate to make a point, but there's no exaggeration here. 50% of the time, excuse me, having some trouble this morning. 50% of the time, the questions I get about how do I increase sales at my company, 50% of the time is, tell your lazy ass salespeople to prospect more. They need more stuff in the pipeline, because I don't care how good you are at selling. You're pretty good and I'm pretty good. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing the jobs we do. But nobody closes everything. And you have to, A, have plenty in the pipeline. B, you've got to know what your closing ratio is. How many, if you need 3 deals, how many, if I close 50%, then I got to have 6 deals at every time. And most salespeople just don't seem to get. Why do you think salespeople are so resistant to prospecting?
Well, I think, rejection is part of the game. Prospecting is hard. We've been through a tough 2.5 years where you can't actually easily go out and meet people. And so finding new opportunity, especially if you're a hunter versus a farmer, is the toughest thing you've got to do. And, it's been a tough go the last couple of years, because there's just been less opportunity on the table. Although it's kind of interesting, depending on what deals you're looking at. I had this filter that I've used over the last few years, which is the deal strategically relevant, tactically urgent, and provide rapid time to value? That, especially through tough economic times, the COVID recession, that's the filter you got to look at your deals at. And if it's not strategically relevant, tactically urgent, provide time to value, it's probably not going to happen, or not going to happen in the time frame that you're expecting. So, that's the toughest part of sales, is building enough sales pipeline to get to your numbers. But in the end, it is a bit of a numbers game, whether you're selling, high-end enterprise deals or volume commodity deals. It's a numbers game, and you need to know the math. I would say to my sales leaders, trust the math, right? And you get emotionally attached to deals, but if the math doesn't work, the math doesn't work. And that usually means your forecast is not going to end up exactly where you expect.
Yeah. I've often said, salespeople lie, numbers don't.
Yeah.
Great.
It's the cold hard truth, isn't it?
It's just the way it is. Look, by our very nature, when we're selling, we have to be optimistic, because for most of us, lose more than we get. Most people don't
Right.
close more than 50% of the deals they're working on, which
Yeah.
means we're taking this massive rejection. And in order to take the beating that we take every day, hearing no, 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 we have to be optimistic that everything's going to work out. But that optimism often blinds us to when people are saying no, or when a deal is just not worth working on. And I find that way too often salespeople are chasing deals that they just have no shot of coming through because, well, I'm working on it, boss, or I'm working on it, Jeff. Yeah, but why? They're not responding to your emails. They're not responding to your calls. They're not engaging. Go find somebody who wants to talk to you. Any thoughts on that, Jeff?
I'm in violent agreement. I think I call it ruthless qualification, and I would tell my reps, that's a good deal. Somebody's going to win it, but it ain't us. So you better go off now. And you know, in technology selling, and especially in mid market or enterprise technology selling, it's usually not just the rep. The rep has a sales team, and often the rep is responsible for allocating resources. So he has a pre-sale systems engineer, a partner manager. There's often finance folks. So that rep running a sales campaign, if it's not well qualified, is spending a lot of the company's resources on deals that you can't win. And so it's not just the rep's time; it's time of the organization. And I think as sales leaders, it's a sales leader's responsibility to work with their sales reps to help them ruthlessly qualify. And that's a bit of what I teach in my program is do you have a process to intentionally and deliberate inspect your sales pipeline? And most sales leaders and many reps don't. They have instinct and experience, and that's good. But do they have an intentional and deliberate process to win their big deals? And often the answer is no.
Yeah, and I like the word you used, ruthless.
Yeah.
A sales leader who is not ruthless in examining somebody's pipeline and doing what I call a pipeline review. It's easy to ask surface questions, but again, too often sales reps are lying to themselves, and unless
Yeah.
you're asking the right questions, uh, I say one of the jobs of a sales leader is let's help the rep get to the truth. The truth
Right.
is you don't have enough in your pipeline. The truth is these three deals that you're working on, only two of them even have a shot. You're wasting your time with the other one. And the smart leader helps guide the sales rep to here's where you need to put your focus. Here's where you might actually win something and make some money.
Yeah, I totally agree. I call it happy years. I go, part of the sales leader's role is to help the rep take happy years off because you're right. We are optimistic by nature. We need to be, but you also need to be fact based, and that can be a challenge. I used to, as sales leader, I used to run a little report with my sales team, and I would figure out the metrics. How much, uh, you know, the metric was 2 to 4 times their 6-month goal in sales pipeline. I would run that report and I could very quickly see who had enough pipeline, who didn't, and people would argue that, with complex CRM systems, Jeff, that's not a very accurate, but as it turns out, 2 to 4 times your 6-month goal in pipeline, if you're running mid-sized deals, was an incredibly accurate measure. And I'd publish that report monthly. And sure enough, the reps on the bottom of the leaderboard were ones who just didn't have enough pipeline. So it all starts there. And the symptom of not enough pipeline is often a poor forecasting capability because you're using happy years to forecast, and that doesn't help anybody, right?
Yep. And if you don't have enough in your pipeline, you're going to focus on those couple of deals that
Yeah.
aren't going to come through anyways. You're wasting time, and that's when that forecast is completely useless. You brought up. Oh, good morning, Steve Kent. Good to see you. Ben Gibbs, my friend, and Don Levine, our executive recruiter from Westbury, New York. You brought up sales engineers and pre-sales engineers, people like that. I find that quite often that the salesperson and the sales engineer, for example, they don't do what I call the dance well. What could a salesperson do to make sure that the other people that the resources they're bringing into a sale actually work well together? It's
Yeah.
crucial.
Yeah. So I do think I view the sales rep as the quarterback of the sales team, right? He doesn't do every job. He doesn't really do every step in the sales campaign, but he's responsible for the sales campaign. And, win or lose, the rep kind of gets the credit. And so I think the rep needs to communicate well with the sales team, make sure that they're on the same page. And some of it is formally sitting down and walking through that deal. Again, that's part of my program is to help sales reps kind of go through the 10 steps of a complex sales campaign. And when I do sales reviews, I never do a sales review, a rapid assessment review, or a sales strategy review without the pre-sales technical resource, because they often see the deal from a different perspective. Technical people of the customer will often share different things with the technical resource than they will with a sales rep. So the sales rep has to be opened to getting perspective from other members of the sales team. And the only way they can do that is to make sure they're communicating, around the facts. I kind of go, just the facts, ma'am. But they're critical members of the sales team, and the sales rep's smart. He'll work with other members of the sales team to gain access to other stakeholders in the sales campaign who may not be that open to working with salespeople, might be more open to work with a sales leader or with a pre-sales systems engineer. It's all comes down to communication, which is really, I think, fundamental skill for successful sales professionals, right?
Yeah, I'm with you 1,000,000%. Communication is the key. And I'm often stunned in our line of work that I say the most basic thing, and it's a revelation to people. Like, when you're going out on a sales call with a sales engineer, 2 seconds before you walk into the meeting is not the time to talk about, here's what we're going to do. Sit down, plan it out. I'm going to say this. Don't jump in until I do that. I mean, it's very easy. I think two things. One is that it's easy to divide the prospect's attention, and they don't know who's really in charge. And somebody has to be in charge, and it gets confusing. And the other thing I've seen time after time after time is sales engineers like to talk like engineers. And I have a great respect for engineers, but if your prospect is not an engineer and you're talking technical, you can see them figuratively leave the room. Their eyes glaze over and they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. Right. And the salesperson needs to control that conversation and make sure that everybody else on that team is speaking in a way that the prospect's going to understand. Yes?
Yeah, totally. And I think you touched on an important thing, Jeff, which is the sales team needs to stay in their swim lanes. And so, for example, a pre-sales engineer should never be talking about the price of the solution. Whoops, pardon me. Sorry. The pre-sales engineer should never be talking about price, because they have no credibility there. And the sales rep should never be talking about technical configuration. They need to stay in their swim lanes, because the customer expects, to be credible. The customer understands that the rep is going to talk about pricing and delivery and the sales issues. He doesn't want the pre-sales engineer to be doing that. And sometimes people get their swim lanes confused, and then the customer kind of looks and the sales team kind of loses quickly credibility, and the customer goes, I'm not really sure who to believe here. And as a result, the sales team doesn't move the ball as far forward as they could have. So communication, stay in your swim lanes, be prepared, and understand what your single sales objective is when you go on your sales call. You can't cover everything. That gets even a little trickier these days, or it has over the last couple of years, where you're doing a lot of these sales meetings virtually. Zoom and Teams and all those communication tools, it becomes even more important to make sure your camera is on, and that you've briefed your sales team as to what we're going to talk about, because you can't kick them under the table, and it can get very confusing on a Zoom call if people are talking about the wrong stuff.
Brilliant. COVID did change everything in the sales world, and we're still trying to work our way out of it. I don't think virtual selling is ever going to go away completely, and I'm actually a big fan of it. There's nothing that takes the place of a face-to-face meeting, but there's such an economy of scale by using. I don't have to fly across the country to have a meeting with you, and now everybody expects it. So it really has done a great job there. But you mentioned that you've got to have this relationship. You've got to establish rapport, and it's much more challenging to do via video. Any thoughts on what can we do to establish that rapport and nurture that relationship when we're selling virtually?
Yeah. So the counsel I give sales teams is, just imagine you were going into Starbucks to have your sales meeting. What would you do? Would you ever go to Starbucks and have a sales conversation with somebody with your eyes closed? Of course not, Jeff. What are you talking about? Then turn on your camera, right? So, it's better now, but at the beginning of COVID, people went, "No, I don't really want to turn on my camera." And I'm going, well, a lot of the communication we're having, a lot of the eye contact is eye to eye. And so I think the first thing sales professionals need to do is invest in this skill called virtual selling, because it's a skill, right? Just like handling objections and those are all skills. There is a new skill, which is being able to run a meeting virtually. And so I encourage sales professionals, especially if they're early in their career, invest in a good mic. You know, customers need to be able to hear you. Invest in a good camera. Try to have a decent background. You know, for young professionals, sometimes they're working out of 500 square feet apartments. Um, but you know, you only get one chance to make a good impression, and the customer doesn't really care if you're virtual. And if the virtual meeting is not very productive for the customer, he doesn't accept your invitation next time. So I think that is now a new skill for sales teams to be able to run a sales meeting uh, virtually. And there's a lot of good content on the internet now to be able to do this. Not that expensive, but you know, just like a rep needs to invest in a good suit or look professional, they now need to look professional when they're on the screen. And I appreciate, you know, it's been tough with young families and young kids and small apartments, but the customer doesn't really care about that. And so you just need to be aware of your surroundings when you're doing a call. And if it's just not going to work, it might be better to actually reschedule that call than to run a poor call and not get invited back another time. So
Excellent advice.
big checkbox now, virtual selling. And you remember, as a sales rep, you're always trying to differentiate yourself, right? My product, my service, a lot of it now is yourself. And a lot of it is how you show up for a meeting. You know, you wouldn't show up for flip-flops to an executive's meeting with shorts on. So on your Zoom call, make sure you show up as your best self. And some of that is just the fundamentals that are now much easier to execute than there might have been 5 years ago. Does
Excellent
that make
advice.
sense?
That's perfect sense and great advice. And I'll throw in a couple of more. Not only should you have a good microphone, make sure you have a good camera. You know, they're not that expensive. I mean, a $20 camera looks like a $20 camera. You don't have to have a high def camera like I do, but make sure you have a clear picture. Make sure you've got good front lighting. If your face is in shadow, it's distracting. And I also always suggest whatever the fastest internet you can get at your home or your offices, get that. Because if you buffer, if you freeze, it's incredibly distracting and it just destroys your credibility as far as I'm concerned.
Totally. I'm again, we're in violent agreement. It's just, this is some of just the blocking and tackling that that COVID has surfaced. Now, for a sales rep, the beauty is you can make a lot more sales calls today. If if you're in Manhattan and you have to travel and get on the subway to go visit customers, doing it virtually, you can cover a lot more ground. And for me and for you in the training business, remember, I don't want to travel to places I don't have to go. And I did this back in February of 2020 before COVID even hit. I said, wouldn't it be good if I could run my half-day program virtually? And so I did this pilot with a group of technical people and said, hey, I just want to see if I can command your attention, keep people focused for a half day on a Zoom call. And sure enough, this was back in February. The answer was absolutely yes. And, who would have known that would have become, staples for us in the sales business as it goes. But it's just core now and fundamental. And yes, we're going to go back into the office, and yes, we're going to go back and meet customers. But I don't think we're ever going to give up the ability to sell virtually. I think it's here to stay.
I'm with you 1,000,000%. And look, when I started my career in this field, it was kind of sexy when people would want to take me, other places, and very ego gratifying. Jeff, would you come to London and train my team? Of course I'll come. If you've got a check for me, I'm going to come pick it up. But my thought was always, don't you realize they have sales trainers in London? But thank goodness that you don't want them and you want me. But at this point, I'm at the stage where I've done enough of that. It's like, well, the thing I think about is, do they have good food where they want to take me? And can I get a comfortable bed somewhere? And the truth is, I'd rather be in my own bed and in my own home with my dog if I can give the same result virtually. Totally. Is there an advantage to meeting people face to face? Yes. Will I still get on a plane? And I'm sure you will too. Absolutely. But You said it. You can save so much. I can do 10 sales calls instead of
Yeah.
one in a day, maybe, or two
Yeah.
in a day,
Yeah.
and dramatically increase
Yeah.
the likelihood that I'm going to close
Yeah.
someone.
And I think the final thought is I think customers are beginning to kind of enjoy that experience, right? They can, they don't have to entertain people. They don't have to spend 10 minutes in small talk. They can get right to business. They too can be more productive. So we don't want to give up the personal touch. I mean, that's what selling is all about. People buy from people they know, like, and trust, and that's easier to do over a beer than anything. But often it's, what does the customer prefer? Do they prefer virtual or they prefer in person? And you need to be able, as a sales professional, to do what's most comfortable for the customer. So you got to make sure you have that arrow in your quiver and you can do it professionally when the time is right.
Another piece of excellent advice, which I also give out all the time. It's not about what we want. It's not like when you and I started out a million years ago in sales. Here's how it's going to be. It's really, gee, do you prefer texting? Do you like cell phone? What's the best way to reach you? Personally, I ask everybody for their cell phone, and I'm stunned when salespeople don't. Oh, Jeff, if they want to give it to you, they'll give it to you. Well, I'm going to ask every time, because when somebody gives you their cell phone, they're giving you permission to use their cell phone to contact them.
Right on.
So you're absolutely right. You got to do what the customer wants. Have you got a particular focus for salesleadersonly.com? There's a lot of sales training programs out there. What makes yours different?
Yeah. So there is a lot of sales training. And, I call, as an example, if you just go to Amazon.com and look for sales books, you find a lot of sales books focused on top of the funnel, prospecting, handling objections, account planning, marketing. But as I looked, it turns out there isn't that much training to help sales teams when they find a big deal they want to win. Right? How do you execute a sales campaign? And, I think we just assume sales reps and sales leaders know how to do that. And so as I was thinking about, the consulting practice I would build, I did a little experiment. I'm up in Canada. I've been doing this for a while. I have a pretty good network of sales leaders in technology. And so I did the old thing. I just picked up the phone and I said, hey, will you spend 15 minutes and answer some questions for me? And I asked 40 leaders in Canada of large and small tech companies, do you have an intentional and deliberate process to inspect, assess, and coach your team's big deals? And their first answer was, of course I do, the forecast call. And I went, no, the forecast call never has enough time to go deep into a sales campaign. And it turns out think about how sales leaders get their job. They were successful salespeople. So they get anointed. But the job of a sales leader is different than the job of a sales rep. And so most do not have a methodology. There's no rocket science. Enough time, successful sales leaders through instinct and experience figure out how to do this. But if you want to help new sales leaders and even experienced sales reps figure out how to do this, you need an intentional and deliberate process. And so here's an example I use. Imagine you're flying from New York to Boston. You're settling in your seat. The silverhead pilot enters the plane, heads into the cockpit, and you can imagine the conversation he's having with his co-pilot. He looks over at her and he goes, the weather looks good. I've done this flight 1,000 times. Let's batten down the hatches and let's take off. And, that's never going to happen. What does a pilot who's been flying for 30 years do? He goes through a manual checklist to make sure he doesn't miss a step or a stakeholder that could crash their deal, crash the plane. And, if a rep loses a deal, no souls are lost, but you lose enough deals and it has consequences for sales reps and for their families. And so my experience was we don't help. There really isn't much training. And so it's a pretty narrow niche. Helping sales leaders and senior sales reps win more big deals is a pretty specific niche. I sell something I think sales leaders and reps need, but don't want, right? That's never a good place to be. No one wants more sales training. Sales leaders especially figure they got this thing nailed. But as I say, when I do my training, I start the meeting by going, okay, if you run a sales forecast, stand up. And everybody stands up. And then I said, okay, do you run a process to inspect the top 10 to 20 deals in your funnel this quarter? And everybody stands up and I said, the forecast call doesn't count. And 90% of them sit down and they said, how many of you have an intentional and deliberate process to look at your deals out quarter? next quarter. And then most everybody sits down. It happens every time I do the training. So that was, as a result, I figured that was a spot because I've done 3,000 forecast calls. I built this methodology while I ran the subsidiary at NetApp, which is a $5 billion storage company, and then Veeam Software, which is $1.5 billion storage company. And I do the training and people go, Jeff, there's no rocket science there, but I don't have a methodology. And you've just given me the 38 questions I should ask my sales rep. And as we work our way through that deal, many things get surfaced that probably would have been missed. And that's a long answer to your question, but that's really the niche that I'm focused on. And it turns out there aren't that many people doing what I do.
Got it. Yeah. Pete Ekstrom, who's a great trainer in his own right and the author of The Gold Call, he's a cold calling expert, says in terms of finding out what people want, the way they want to be contacted, hire a private detective. Well said, Pete. Now, you've written a book, Winning the Six-Figure Sale. Who did you write that book for?
There it is. Here. I wrote this book for busy sales leaders and senior reps. So that book takes 90 minutes to 2 hours to read. My view is busy sales professionals don't have 5-6 hours to read a 400-page book looking for that 1 or 2 nuggets of gold that they didn't know. So I really wrote it as a guide to help sales leaders inspect, assess, and coach their team's big deals, right? And so sales leaders can get through that. Sales reps who aspire to be sales leaders and want to think like their boss will get a lot of value out of that, out of the book. And, as I do my sales training prior to the program, I say, hey guys, buy the book. It's $15 and it'll give you some insight into what we're going to cover in the half-day program.
Got it. Well, tell me a little bit about the framework or the system that you describe in the book.
Yeah. So again, there's no rocket science. The first step is inspect. And so it's all about inspecting your sales funnel, looking for the big deals that are going to move the forecast needle this quarter and next. Now, not all salesmen on the call are going to be quarterly oriented. I worked for US-based tech companies, very quarterly oriented. But whether it's monthly or quarterly, there are a certain set of big deals that move the needle in your business. Now, if you're in the commodity business, a high velocity business, there may be a ton of small transactions. The book is probably not for you. But if you run mid-sized deals or large deals, there's probably going to be 5, if you're a rep, there might be 5 to 10 deals in your funnel that you really need to focus on. And so the first step of the process is inspect your funnel and get laser focused on those big deals you need to focus. So that's step 1, inspect. The next step is a methodology to assess the quality of your sales campaigns early in the forecast process. You really need to ruthlessly qualify to know whether this deal should be called into your forecast. And so I break the process into a 15-minute rapid assessment review. That's a set of 13 questions the rep and sales leader go through to qualify for budget, authority, need, or business outcome and timing. It's called BANT. I didn't invent it. IBM invented it 1,000 years ago. But it's a very simple way for a sales leader and rep to just have a conversation about, is there a budget? Has something changed in the budgeting process? Has the budget been released? With COVID, a lot of things got budgeted that never got actually released to be spent. And so talking about the budget, talking about authority, are you talking to the person who has authority to spend the budget or create a budget? That's an interesting question. What need, or more importantly, what business outcome, are you expecting your solution to provide? And that most reps understand the customer's need, but don't often translate that into business outcomes. Customers have a lot of problems. They have a lot of needs. They tend to spend money on things that provide business outcomes for them. And as a rep, if you don't know the business outcomes that your system's going to provide, you're really not, you're not in the best position. And then it's timing. What's the compelling event that's going to cause the deal to happen when you forecast it? What happens if the customer misses the compelling event? Oh, I gave them a quote. It's going to expire at the end of the month. What happens if they miss them? They're going to want the same price next quarter, right? So 15 minutes, 20 minutes, rapid assessment review. And then if the deal is well qualified, I then go into a 45-minute structured sales strategy review where we walk through the 10 steps of a complex sales campaign. And, what prompted me to do this, Jeff, is as a sales leader running a large company across a large geography, I needed a way to get close to the deals because I was forecasting them up to my boss. And if I didn't have any clarity and I was just taking the word of the sales leader and the sales rep who all had happy years on, you know, things get very filtered by the time they would reach me. And I needed a way to quickly get focused on those deals that moved my forecast. And that's really what the whole process is about. And there's no rocket science. I give sales leaders 38 questions, 13 in the rapid assessment review. That's the qualifying call with their rep. Then 25 more questions to walk through the other steps of a complex sales campaign. And at the end of the call, at the end of the sales strategy review, the whole goal is that the rep ends up with a better sales campaign than when they started. And I tell people it's not to find errors, it's not to find mistakes. We're clearly going to uncover stuff in your sales campaign, but it's all about helping you run a better sales campaign so you don't miss important steps or stakeholders that could crash your deal. And once once reps get over the hurdle of, hey, this is going to be a colonoscopy, right? They kind of get comfortable with the idea that we're all in this together. The sales leader's job is to help reps be more successful. And this is just a standard methodology. And it's kind of like I give the rep the answers to the questions. I give them the questions before they write the exam. What could be better than that? They know what the questions are. They actually go off and prepare the document before we meet. So the rep has time to work with their sales team to build a sales campaign. And through the call, the goal is to help uncover rough spots that we need to go address. And reps, it turns out, they kind of enjoy the process. And I know that because once they've been a few times, they'll call their boss or they'll call me and go, hey, Jeff, I have a big deal. I'd like to run through the process. And that's when I go, okay, we've now got over this hurdle of fear, of uncovering stuff the reps don't know. Again, long answer to the question. I hope that helps.
But a good one. And we're a little bit more than halfway through this interview. We're talking to Jeff Goldstein, the author of Winning the Six-Figure Sale and the founder of salesleadersonly.com. Jeff, you mentioned something a few moments ago that I want to come back to, and that's reps who are speaking to people who they think are the decision maker, but it turns out they're not. And I can't tell you how many times I've had chats with reps. Are you speaking to the decision maker? Oh, yeah, I'm definitely talking to the decision maker, until it comes time to make the decision. And then they find out, oh, she had to take it to her boss. What can a sales rep do to uncover, are they really speaking to the right person or people?
So I think one of the most fundamental things a rep needs to do in a complex sales campaign, if you can talk to the person who has discretionary ability to spend the budget, then that's fine. You know who that person is. It's really a features and function and price conversation. That's a pretty simple sales campaign. But in more complex sales campaigns, most people have ego and they go, yeah, this is my decision. So the first question I would say, in addition to yourself, is there anyone else involved in the evaluation process or selection process? And sometimes when you go, in addition to yourself, is there anybody else? You might get some insight that, yeah, there are other people. But one of the core things I tell people is, you need to get access to power in a sales campaign, meaning you need to figure out who the key decision makers are. And one of the key things you need to do in a sales campaign to develop a competitive advantage is identify a coach. Okay. A coach is somebody on the inside who kind of likes your solution and might like to see you win. Somebody who's prepared to share really how your campaign is going. You throw a grenade over the transom, you want to know whether it landed or not. You want to know whether what you're doing is resonating. You want to know what the competition is up to. And so one of the key things I look for when doing the review is, do you have a coach who's prepared to share key inside information? They're going to attend meetings you're never going to get invited to. And so the way I would do is I would go to the coach and go, okay, like who is in the selection process? Who is the key decision maker? This guy's, this gal is telling me they are. Is there anybody else? So I think you can win complex sales campaigns, perhaps without getting to see the CEO or the president of the company. It's very difficult to win a complex sales campaign without a coach guiding you as your deal works through the thing. And so to me, that's the very best way. People, I had somebody who said, hey, customers lie all the time. And I don't like to be negative like that. But, everybody has an ego. They'll tell you what they want to hear. They don't want you going over their head. They're trying to keep their life simple. You need a coach inside the campaign to tell you what's really going on. And then you need to be very respectful and use that information carefully. But early in the sales campaign, I tell people, you got to go develop a coach. And sometimes it is a technical person in the campaign, and sometimes it's not the key decision maker, because the lower they are, the less political they might be, less savvy they might be about how they shouldn't share stuff with sales reps. But you need a coach. And that's the best way you can really tell whether you're talking to the key decision makers and whether your sales campaign is actually resonating with the customer. Find a coach. If you're a sales rep, find a coach and treat them well.
What you call a coach, I call a rabbi, but it's same exact thing. And the other thing I find quite often, Jeff, is sales reps are just asking the wrong questions or stupid questions. Like, and you even alluded to it, hey, are you the decision maker? Oh yeah. Everybody always says I'm the decision maker until it comes time to make the decision. And to me, it's really about asking a better question.
Yeah.
And the question I like to tell sales reps to ask it is, hey, the last time your company made a decision about something like this, how'd you go about it and who was involved? Well, when they tell you how they've done it in the past, that's what they're going to do now too. So unless the person you're speaking with says, I gathered all the information, I made a decision, I wrote a check, you're probably not speaking to a decition maker, which is not always the worst thing. I won't talk to anybody who's not a decision maker, but I'm not selling a complex sale, multi-million-dollar software, and I have a short sales cycle, fairly short. But Look, I love sales managers and I love coaching them. For coaching, I go right to them. But if I'm selling sales training, a sales manager can't sign a check. I know I've got to speak to a VP or above. So I think one of the things that causes trouble there is it's very easy to get meetings with people who can't do you any good whatsoever. It's more difficult to get in front of people who can sign checks, but it's worth trying.
And I call that access to power. Who's in the power base? Who's making decision makers? And, sometimes reps say to me, hey, Jeff, it's a new customer. I've never sold to this prospect before. How do I figure this out? And that's where I go, if you're a vendor, are you selling through a partner? Has that partner done a deal with the customer before? And it might be that the partner is selling something different, but the procurement process, if they're selling or they've sold a complex sales campaign, they've probably been through this process before. So go ask your partner if they can just share with you some insight in the campaign. And often sales reps will share G2, about what that customer looks like. So even if they're not selling what you sold, describe to me their evaluation process. And then the other thing I encourage people to do is ask them to describe the customer's negotiating process. Because the customer has a negotiating process. And often, again, if it's a complex sale, customers are used to dealing with reps. So they've often now developed a methodology to deal with salespeople. And so, I ask people, like, who are you negotiating with? Is it the IT department? Is it the line of business? Or is it procurement? When you go into your deal, you need to understand whether and how many rounds of negotiation there's going to be. Because if you give them your firm and final price and you got 2 more rounds of negotiating to go, you're pooched. Again, a coach or a partner who's been through this before can be extremely valuable in helping you understand the landscape of what you need to do to get your deal closed. And because often reps don't understand that and they don't go to the trouble, they forecast stuff that has no right to be forecasted yet because they think they're on the 10-yard line. They're actually on the 50-yard line. And being on the 50-yard line with 3 minutes to go is, generally not the best place to be. In American football, a lot happens in the last 2 minutes of a sales campaign. But it's a process. If these campaigns take months or quarters to close, you need to go through all the steps to really make sure you cover all your bases.
Yeah, I love your point about coach or a rabbi. And another way is, go on to LinkedIn. I consider LinkedIn to be the salesperson's best friend. See who's connected to the person that you're selling to that's also connected with you. They may be able to give you some information if you just ask. I mean, I love that you said it a couple of times now, and I say it constantly. This is not rocket science. I always say, if it was rocket science, I couldn't do it. My daughter is actually studying to be an aerospace engineer. She's going to be a rocket scientist, but I'm not. Thank goodness this sales and sales management is not rocket science. There's some very basic and fundamental things that if you do those right, you're going to win. At least you'll win enough to make sure that you're providing yourself and your family and your company with the income that you all need. Totally. Jeff, I want to go in a different direction now. What is the look back question? I was looking at some of your LinkedIn posts, and some of them are very intriguing. What's the look back question?
Yeah. So this is the very last question I ask in the sales strategy review. And, the look back question is, the sales rep looking in the mirror and saying to himself, if I was to get a phone call today from the customer that I lost the deal, what fatal flaws did the customer uncover that I didn't cover off? Right. So now this is just you reflecting on what am I missing? Right. And, it's interesting. Sales reps often know what the strengths of their campaign are. And if they're ruthlessly honest with themselves, they know where their weaknesses are. Sometimes their product isn't 100% fit. Right. And so there's weaknesses in the product that they're trying to sell around. Sometimes they have not got access to power, have met all the key decision makers. So I just ask, if you were to get a phone call today that you lost the deal, what fatal flaws did the customer uncover? Right. And when you think about the answer, okay, now go cover off those fatal flaws before you get that phone call. And I got that question from a customer of mine actually in the process. And he says, it's a very revealing question. And, reps just need to sit quietly and reflect on that question, because that bad news phone call, we all know what that's like. You did a great job. The proposal was fantastic. We really enjoy working with you, but we've decided to head in a different direction. To avoid that call, what is it the customer is uncovering, and what can you do to make sure that you address it? And I must tell you, sometimes the fatal flaws are actually fatal, right? And, if the customer has a hard requirement and you can't meet that requirement and you think you can finesse around it, when you ask that question, it may help you decide that really this is not the best fit and I should bail before I spend any more time on this deal. Hardest thing for a rep or a sales leader to do is bail on a big deal, especially if they don't have enough of it. But the second worst thing they can do is come in second place in the sales campaign. There's no worse place to finish than second. You spent all the time and energy and you came out with, unlike horseshoes and hand grenades, there's no prize for second place, right? So that's the look back question. And I encourage people, sales leaders and reps, to use that question often and early. Don't wait till the very end. What are the fatal flaws? Well, as your campaign is evolving, you're uncovering things and rough spots. So focus on those and make sure you cover off the rough spots before you get that phone call. It's a simple question. Most people don't answer it or ask it. And I ask it often, and reps go, yeah, I need to go figure this one out. Yeah. Leads to a lot of interesting conversation and a lot of interesting sales tactics required before you lose your deal.
Yeah. Now that you explained it, it makes perfect sense to me. I'm smiling because it's funny to me how guys like you and me, we pretty much are saying the same things and just using different words. One of the things I always tell reps is, look, I'm an incredibly optimistic guy. I'm what I call a realistic optimist, but I'm incredibly optimistic. But when it comes to deals, I want you to be pessimistic. I want you to be thinking, what could go wrong? What are the things that I'm missing? Because if you're not thinking about that, the prospect is prospects, first of all, our brain science is we always think about the negative first when we're looking to buy something. What if I invest a lot of money with Jeff Goldstein and sales don't go up, or Jeff Goldberg, with any of the Jeffs, because that's just the way brain science works. What if? And if we as reps are not thinking about what could go wrong, then we're just kind of blissfully going through and going, la, 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 la. Of course, they're going to sign until we get that call you just talked about. And I just got one the other day. Jeff, we've decided to go with another consultant.
Yeah. Yeah.
Man. Well, I'm still trying to figure out what went wrong on that one, by the way.
One of the important steps in a sales campaign that, again, I step back and I ask sales leaders, can you name the top 10 steps in a complex sales campaign? Most of them get 5, 6, 7. They very rarely get 10. And one of the important questions they miss is I ask them, what are you doing to ensure the customer's success before you get your purchase order? Customer success, what do you mean? Well, things like, what are the risks in your deal from the customer's perspective? What could cause this project to fail from the customer's perspective? Because customers think about risk all the time. We're optimistic souls. We don't think about risk, and we're not going to lose our job if that, customer can't implement, most often, but the customer can, right? And so they're thinking about risk a lot. And if you can think about what does this customer need to be successful and bake that into your deal. So things like training, things like implementation, uh, eh, you know, um, things
Support.
like skills transfer, things like support, things like maintenance agreement. Those are all things that you need to bake into your deal before you discount it so heavily that you have nothing left to give, and help ensure that the customer's successful before you started. I did a program recently for a cloud company, and in the cloud, you sell the platform, but if the customer doesn't have success, they don't consume your solution and you really don't make much revenue, right? The customer decides to go in your direction, but it's not like they spent $1 million on hardware and are putting them on the floor. If your solution doesn't work, they can fairly easily change to another cloud provider. And I asked the question, what are you doing to ensure customer success so the customer consumes your solution? And this was a pretty sophisticated cloud provider. And they said, we have a customer success team. They worry about that, but that's after the deal is done, right? I'm going after the deal is done. If the customer's first experience with you is not a good one, if the first time they call support and they go, well, who are you? We don't know who you are. Um, you end up in the penalty box, and until you get out of the penalty, but you can't sell them anymore. So ensuring the customer success and thinking about your deal from their perspective, what are the risks that cause the customer to fail from their perspective, is again a pretty interesting set of questions to ask that most reps don't think about until either the deal is done or they're in trouble. And then then that's never a good thing. You got to bail your way out of the deal, get yourself back out of the ditch. And often you can do it, but much better if you don't go in the ditch in the first place.
Yeah, I love this idea. Every company says we give great customer service, but you don't find that out until you actually buy and get the good customer service by using your methodology and thinking in advance and actually showing and sharing with the prospect, here's what we're going to do to take great care of you. And we're thinking about all this stuff before you even buy from us.
Yeah.
Now you're telling people, look, you're in good hands with Allstate. You come with us. We've already thought about all these concerns you've got. We've got them covered. I'm a big fan of telling people exactly what they need to hear, which is, I'm going to take great care of you.
Right.
I love the way you think, because customers are thinking about what could go wrong. And each, procurement's different than the people, the IT department. The IT department's different than the CEO, and they all have a different set of concerns. And if we're not thinking about that in advance and letting them know we've considered this and how we're going to take care of it, and that they don't have to be concerned, then that's when people are stuck with, yeah, you know what? I just wasn't sold, and I wasn't convinced that they were going to take care of me. That's our job as the sales rep to make sure that they understand.
Yeah. One of the things I tell people is, think about what the customer's thinking about. How much is my investment? How much is my return? How quickly will I get return? And how much risk is there involved in this whole deal? That's what customers are always thinking about. And if you're a rep, even if you're selling a commodity solution, you're trying to differentiate yourself and your company and your product. And showing your prospect that you're thinking about the risks that they might be concerned about is a fantastic way to differentiate yourself, even if you're selling a solution that other people are selling. So thinking about things from the customer's perspective is always a good thing. And thinking about risk and thinking about what they're going through on their buyer's journey is difficult for reps to do, because we're often focused on our numbers and our forecasts and our commission check. But you got to put yourself in their shoes. And that's a great way to just differentiate yourself from all the other sales reps who are banging on that prospect's door, right?
Yeah.
Important step in the campaign.
Absolutely. You one of the things I know you ask salespeople is, what's your winning edge? What is the winning edge, and why is that important when selling?
Yeah. So that's back to the competitive advantage. Who are the key decision makers in your campaign? Have you met them in person, or in this case, over Zoom? And do you have a coach? Those are the three questions I ask to determine if you have a competitive edge. And as I say, you can win a big deal without getting access to power. If you're selling a $100,000 solution to a bank, you might not get to meet the president of the bank, right? But you want to know who's in that decision stream, who needs to sign off, and then back to, do you have a coach? So that's how you develop a competitive advantage. Access to power, meet them in person, develop a coach. That will give you an edge no matter what you're selling. Doesn't guarantee you'll be successful, but without that edge, it's, and a coach, it's pretty difficult to win a complex sales campaign over months without at least covering those bases off.
Got it. We're quickly running out of time. So let's see. I've got a million more questions to ask you because you're fascinating, but let's go with this one. You just mentioned differentiation. Differentiation clearly is important when we're selling, especially in a commoditized sale. What makes our product or service different so that people can see it as better? In some cases, it's easy to figure out what the differentiation is, but in many, it's not so apparent. It's not so obvious. So how can a sales rep differentiate, especially in a more commoditized sale?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's back to understanding things from the customer's perspective. What is the customer looking for from your solution? What needs are they trying to address? Back to what business outcomes are they trying to address? Right. And I just go back to that. Most reps don't focus on the customer's business outcomes. So you want to differentiate yourself even with a commodity solution, understand how the customer is going to use your product and what they're trying to get from your solution from a business, not technical perspective. And often the difference between winning and losing is pretty small. It's showing up with enthusiasm. It's showing up if you're showing up virtually looking professional. Often these are little things that make a difference, but you really got to focus on the things that you can control. You can't control your product feature set. You might be able to control the price, based on what your discounting approval looks like. But understanding things from the customer's perspective is always the biggest way, I think, to differentiate yourself. And especially for junior reps, they're so trained around features, advantage, and benefits that they're not really understanding things from their customer's perspective. And, as I work with, I work with typically senior sales reps who often you would think have this all nailed, and sometimes they don't because they're chasing even bigger commission checks, right? So commodity selling, that's always tricky, but thinking about the customer is never a bad thing, and always helps make you look different than the people you're competing with.
Yeah, a couple of old sales dogs like us, a lot's changed over the last almost 49 years now that I've been selling, but some things haven't. And old sales dogs like us know the acronym WIFM, WIFM, which is what's in it for me. And if you as the sales rep cannot elaborate on what's in it for them, how are you going to expect them to get it? It's not their job to figure it out. It's our job to make sure that they understand completely.
And Jeff, I can't, I so agree with that. Often reps just present their story and expect the customer to connect the dots. And because you've done this 100 times, you know how the dots are connected. Sales reps have to connect the dots for the customer, no matter how complex the deal is. And I say that to reps, connect the dots. Don't just present your story. You have to put it in a perspective that it matters to the customer. And simple as that sounds, it's great advice for reps, no matter, how junior or experienced they are, I think.
Yeah, and it's actually not that hard to do if you're thinking the right way. Here's the way I explain it to reps. This is very simple. When you're talking about any different feature, any feature of what you're offering, simply end that with, and here's what that does for you, and here's how that's going to help you, and here's what that means to you, because everything that comes after that is what's in it for the prospect. Yeah. Again, it's not rocket science, Jeff. Jeff, I'm sharing my screen now, and could you please tell people if they're interested, how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, so I'm pretty easy to reach. My website is www.salesleadersonly.com. If you go / the Sales Pro Network, you'll find a whole bunch of downloadable assets you can use. They're free, Jeff, to your audience. You can find me on LinkedIn at Jeff Goldstein. You can see it up there on the screen. You can reach out to me. There's my phone number. These are all ways to contact me. I'm easy to reach, and I'm at my desk every day. And while I may not respond in 5 seconds, I get back to everybody who contacts me. So salesleadersonly.com is a great place to start. You'll find all the resources, and salesleadersonly.com / the Sales Pro Network is a way to get some specific assets that might help your audience, Jeff.
Great, Jeff. And this is going to be converted to a podcast. So for people who aren't looking at this, you want to give out your phone number and your email address for those people who are listening?
Sure. Email address is Jeff, spelled Jeff, at salesleadersonly.com. And my phone number is 416-723-1737. I'm up here in Toronto, Canada, Eastern time zone. There you go.
Jeff, thank you so much for generously sharing your brilliance today. I really appreciate it. Love speaking with you. And I'll end as I always do. Gang, please remember, sales is a game of making things happen. So get out there and make sales happen. Thank you, Jeff Goldstein. Really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Thanks so much, Jeff. You be well. Take care.